Coming to you live from Tamarindo. I am Suzanne Titkemeyer. If you don't know who I am, I used to write for a organization known as Pathos. I used to write a column called No Longer Quivering. I wrote about fundamentalist religions. I'm coming in today from Tamarindo, where I live, and it is pouring down, raining outside. My WTF forecast says today is a good day for sweaty balls. 79 degrees and raining like crazy. So it's sticky, it's gross, it's not really hot, it's not really cold. It's just gross. So this is as good of a day as any to talk about some things about, hey, Christine, about talking in tongues, speaking in tongues. Earlier today, one of my friends PM'd me and she was kind of crying on my shoulder a little bit, which is fine. I was laying up in the bed because I am fighting some kind of virus, some dumb virus, as they say here. And it's not the virus. I've already been tested for that. It's not that. It's just one making me feel like crud. So I didn't do much today. So she hit me up and we were talking. And she started talking a little bit about her speaking in tongues experience at her old church. And I was pretty flabbergasted because I had just finished spitting mine up for my book, because this is one of the reasons my book is taking forever. I'm being reminded left and right of crap that I'd forgotten completely about in my experience. And this is about speaking in tongues, which is all kinds of weird in and of itself. Now, when I first joined my fundy church, we did not do any speaking of tongues. We may have been quiverful, but nobody was going Shandai, blah, 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 blah. Nobody was doing that. That was something that people started doing a little bit later. And I've heard all kinds of thinking on what speaking in tongues is. The standard evangelical flavor thing that everybody says is it's your prayer language, your personal prayer language between you and Jesus, and you're praying in tongues. Well, might be true. I don't want to throw that out and say I don't believe in that 100%, because I am of the opinion there are a lot of things in life that could be true. There are things that could be true that I don't believe in at all. And I don't believe in speaking in tongues any longer. Not that I did much anyway. So I know a lot of people go to churches like some Assemblies of God, some IFB, where they say if somebody else at the church cannot give you an immediate interpretation of the entire thing you've said in tongues, then it is not valid. That it's just completely invalid unless somebody else is right there saying, yes, this is the word of the Lord. This is what's happening. Lord, the Lord says this through that. And there are some places that just think it's a-okay. You don't have to understand it. And then there are people that say that it is absolutely not a thing. Like I said, I don't want to throw this baby out with the bathwater, because the entire thing is not settled in my mind, even though I'm tending to think it's people. How did I put it in my book? I called it self-hypnosis. I've seen so many things that I consider self-hypnosis or else performative Christianity. Now, how many people are speaking in tongues because it's performative and it makes them feel better, like they're actually doing something, and have they got eyeballs on them and that's the only attention they get? How many people are self-deluded and self-hypnotized by some of these things? I don't know. And how many people are doing it sincerely? I just don't know. I can't break it down. It's just been mind-boggling. But my old church, there were very few that spoke in tongues. The ones that did kind of did it down on the down low. It wasn't a big thing. Nobody made a big deal of it. We were a non-denominational Christian church. And when I first got there, it was a very standard, just very sweet country church that was very straight down the middle Christianity without any weird stuff added. I've talked about this before, how as time went on, it got weirder. And I want to talk about what was easily one of the weirdest nights of my life, and that is taken into account that I went to Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship 100,000 times and laughed and rolled on the floor and did all of that stuff. Tea parties on the ceiling almost. We did a lot of just really weird stuff, and I loved it. Now I'm looking back and going, no, that's kind of weird. So this tops the weirdness of all of that easily. I had an aunt. Well, I shouldn't say I had. I have an aunt in South Louisiana who is still a very fundamentalist type religious person. Everybody on that side of the family is Catholic, but her and I. And she goes to a evangelical church that's non-denominational still to this day. I don't. I'm currently not going to church at all because I cannot guarantee my safety against those things I'm allergic to. So I don't go. I stay home. And the non-denominational church that we went to did not practice tongues at all. That was not a thing at first. And then as time went on, when you would get in a prayer circle and pray with others, people would start whispering out, blah, 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 you know, their prayer language. And I was fine with that. If you want to talk softly and say your prayers, that's fine. Where I started to have a problem with it, even from the beginning, was people were going, Shundai, blah, 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 to the Lord, blah, blah, blah. Hey, Christoph fan. So people were just making a big deal of it, and they were just emoting and being all this and that. I always have a problem with that. You know, it's a problem when you walk into a church and it seems like bedlam, like everything is happening kind of crazy. And I'm not saying that God can't offend everybody with chaos in order to work whatever he's trying to do, because clearly he can. But at the same time, I have to wonder exactly what kind of blessings are brought in chaos. I attended a church with a friend. They spoke in tongues and it terrified me. Christoph fan, it is terrifying if you're not used to it. So I never could do it. It just was not something I could do, even when our church started doing it a lot. And I mean a lot. I just could not. I would just stand there stock still. I was very uncomfortable with it, extremely uncomfortable. So my aunt, my dear sweet aunt, who I still love and I still talk to on a regular basis, we just don't talk about religion anymore because we're both on very different places with that. She believed in speaking in tongues. All that stuff, she believed in it. I went farther and I believed in all the weirdness. I did all the weird things. I was expecting to see gold and gemstones fall from the ceiling, the whole yards. I was just like, nah. And I couldn't speak in tongues. Hola, Katie Rodriguez. Couldn't speak in tongues. So my aunt, every now and then, we would take a little trip down to Pensacola. And I was with one of my really good friends by the name of Chloe on this trip. I didn't bring my aunt with me, but Chloe and I went, along with my husband and my kids, to Brownsville Revival in Pensacola, Florida. If you're not familiar with what the Brownsville Revival was, it took place at an AOG church in Pensacola, and it was supposedly an outpouring of God, a revival. And that Lindell Cooley did music at this thing. He was playing all kinds of songs. And if you had to ask me to name a Lindell Cooley song right now, I couldn't, except to say that a lot of them sounded kind of like Southern honky tonk. Lindell was extremely talented. So whenever I went down to Louisiana and I could sneak over to Pensacola, which was just like a 4.5-hour hop, skip, and a jump from South Louisiana, I'd go down there and go for a night of the revival. So that night, my friend Chloe and I went. And towards the end of the evening, they said, okay, who here has never spoken tongues that wants to speak in tongues? Go over there with those people, because they were breaking us off at the end of the night, after the service, after all the singing, after the rolling on the floor and doing whatever we're going to do. They were dividing people up into different groups and things. So Chloe and I went with the speaking in tongues things because neither one of us had ever spoken tongues. And Chloe had been a non-denominational Christian way longer than I had. She had been that her entire life. And she was probably mid to late 30s at the time, which was about how old I was. Well, they divided us up and they started trying to work with us. First, they got up and they lectured about how speaking in tongues was this blessing from the Lord and all believers could do it. You just had to do X, Y, and Z. So they kept leading us through these things, these different exercises to loosen you up to speak in tongues. And then they released different teachers to different groups of us. Well, by the very end of the night, like 11:30, it was myself, Chloe, and maybe one other person. And we each had like a crowd working with us. And I started to realize they were never going to let me out of there unless I spoke in tongues. I was going to be standing in that room for the rest of my life. I was going to be eating, sleeping, living there until I managed to shout out Shandai, hallelujah, whatever. So one of the things that they told us that we had to do was sing. So if you can't speak in tongues, anybody can sing in tongues. So it became sort of a Shandai thing. I managed to push out a few pallid, paltry syllables of song that made no sense to me. And they said, oh, by Jeeves, I think she's got it. And I was immediately pushed out the door and released back to my husband. As I'm trudging out of this room of torture after a full night of this crapola, I'm looking back at my friend Chloe, and now she has everyone there surrounding her, shouting encouragement for her to speak in tongues. So I waited with my family another 20, 30 minutes, and she came trudging out and told me she never did speak or sing in tongues. She just didn't do it. She said, I can't do it. I don't know why I can't do it. And immediately started beating herself up. And then by the next morning, she told me, she said, speaking in tongues is demonic. Who knew? And so I was back at that. I said it was one of the weirdest nights I've ever had in Fundy Town was the night where they were trying to make me speak in tongues. And I invented a sound to get the hell out of the room because I knew I was never going to be able to be, hey, Grace Peter, I was never going to be able to come up with this noise that they wanted. They wanted me to say these things and they weren't happening. It was just not happening. There's a lot of things that happened at the church as a result of when they started straying to speaking in tongues, believing that gemstones were going to, and gold and feathers were going to fall from the ceiling, that everybody was going to get healed. There were all kinds of things that came out of that. And I've talked about this before, but we had a boy that, a neighbor boy of one of the kids at the church who came to a lock-in, who ended up getting exorcised, even though he was merely stoned. And speaking in tongues played a large part in that. My friend Lana, that was doing the exorcism, sitting on the boy, forcing him to the floor, was shouting out these different Shandais and various things. And I was just kind of off to the side staring because it just kept getting weirder and weirder as time went on. Like I said, some of these things I just didn't buy. They felt wrong. And I managed to shut up the voice in my head and actually keep doing these things, or at least not saying, why in the hell are you doing these things? They are the stupidest thing I ever heard. But I managed to keep my mouth shut. This movement was huge in Toronto, Canada in the 90s. I was going to say that if you had been here early, you would have heard me say Toronto, Canada, Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship, where I was. The Toronto thing came out of Brownsville Assemblies of God, the Brownsville Revival. It came out of Pensacola. It happened in Pensacola. John Arnett and Carol Arnett went to Pensacola and carried it back up to Toronto. Hey, Arctic Timberwolf. So they carried that back. Occasional spastic chicken. Were you there when you heard them? They roaring like lions. People would roar. Other people would bark. And there was a whole barnyard of sounds that were being released through Toronto. That used to freak my husband out. I would haul him with me to go to Toronto happenings at CBM, Pat Robertson's place in Virginia Beach. I'd be kicked out of those churches because I'd tell them they're all nuts. Katie Rodriguez, all I can say is when this was going on and you felt like you were part of this, you were not about to rock the boat and say, hey, this is a big old bunch of baloney. You were going to go with it, roll on the floor, shout Shandai, look for the gold and the gemstones falling, get pushed to the ground, do fire tunnels, wave flags, do all the weird stuff because it felt normal. It didn't feel weird. It felt like we were in some kind of very weird vanguard of Christianity. My cousin used to lead worship at Toronto Airport during that. She's no longer part of the church at all. It was something else. There was a huge movement in Winnipeg as well. Grace, I bet I know who your cousin is because I used to go to Toronto a lot in those days. Lady Hawk, man, and I thought the Catholic Church was weird. The worst we did was pretend to eat actual flesh and blood. Girl, it is so strange, some of the things that we did in those days. And we were so eager to believe it. I think there was such an expectation of the miraculous that we were all self-hypnotizing. We were all self-hypnotizing, and it was just gotten really weird. Grace, I have a question about Toronto. I would love to know this. If you could ask your cousin if you ever run to her sometime. There used to be a song that the Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship Band used to play called Soakin'. That was Eric Clapton's Cocaine reworked with Christian lyrics. Soakin' for soaking prayer, which to this day, I'm not sure soaking prayer is a bad thing because it's literally meditation is all it is. You're just laying yourself back on the floor, sofa, whatever, and you're listening to worship music, very low-key worship music, and you're just resting. You're just resting. You're letting your mind go where your mind will go. You're praying. I still sometimes do that. Now, I don't do it with the same music I used to do it. I used to listen to Todd Bentley back then. I adored Todd Bentley. Todd came out of a tradition called Fresh Fire Canada. And Todd used to go all over the place. And one of the things that he had was he had these wonderful worship CDs where there would be this really low-key worship music, and he would be talking and praising and singing during it and stuff. Like, I remember my favorite one had to do with soaking like a pickle in the brine, because one of the oldest recipes ever found, or at least he claimed, was for brining pickles. So he said that you should be soaking like a pickle in the brine. And looking back, I'm looking at that going, what in the hell was I thinking? Because that just seems so weird. And I love pickles. I'm one of those people that when I go anywhere where there are like Jewish fresh pickles, where you can get the kosher dills with the extra garlic that are fresh, that aren't canned. Oh, my word. I could tear up a jar of those. I'll get a container of those. But Bentley, is that the guy with all the tattoos? Yes, he had a lot of tattoos. He had been in and out of trouble as a teen with drugs, with alcohol, with all sorts of stuff until he found the Lord at 18. He was like some kind of semi motorcycle badass with all his tattoos and things. And he had long hair, long, kind of dirty blondish hair, stringy hair, and a beard. And like I said, he had all these CDs that I just loved. It was just a joy to hear his voice singing these scriptures and talking about meanings. And they were all kind of out of the box stuff. It wasn't like in my father's house, there are many rooms in his mansion. It wasn't standard stuff. Grace, he has done a lot of stuff. He has had an affair, they found out. They found out not only that Todd Bentley had an affair, it is rumored that he used to sleep with women all over the place. When he would go to a place and do a revival, he'd sleep with a pile of women. He's married. He was married. I've heard a lot of Christian music that was actually pretty good. Some of it is very positive. Take out the references to God, Jesus, overt Christian things, and even an atheist like me can enjoy it. Lady, I still listen to some worship music. Some of it, I look back and there's some things I can't listen to. It is just too much. I remember after I'd been out a while, I ended up throwing up in the bushes at the Mennonite store because they were playing, "Come, now is the time to worship. Come, now is the time to serve your God." And there was just something about that song on the overhead speakers, and I just was like, whoa. And I was outside making like the exorcist in the bushes just from hearing this one worship song that I must have sung 1,000 times from the pulpit while on the platform. And there's some of those songs from the 90s that I cannot listen to. I just cannot listen to it just automatically now because of some of the things that I've seen and heard happening. And Todd was a good example of everything that I've just gotten gagged on. He has fallen from grace. He went to the Florida outpouring, I think it was afterwards. There was a church in South Florida where he started ministering back in 2000s, 2004, 2005, until all of this stuff came out about him and various women and sleeping with an intern and this and that and the other thing. And here's where it gets pure comedy to me about him. This is the part I'm still laughing over. They're a group of pastors. Hey, Kentucky, I wasn't planning on being on this afternoon. I have just been felled by some kind of stomach flu, which I'm talking about throwing up now. It's like, so anyway, Todd and all of this, and there were all these other pastors that I know do not submit themselves to any type of oversight, like Tim Bailey was one of them. I want to say another one was John Piper. Anyway, they tried to form a committee and officially spank Todd. And they wanted him to submit to them as oversight so that he could be restored. And he refused to be repentant at all to them. And here they are with no actual authority over him, with no actual authority over them, trying to be authority over him. So it got really weird and silly. And they were going, "You're terrible. You won't even submit to authority." Well, dude, who died and appointed you Jesus Jr.? In Florida is what I heard about him. I think he was like body slamming people on stage. Artie Timberwolf, yes, he does that kind of thing. He does some very out there things. And in Florida, he'd become extremely, extremely arrogant in how he's handling things. And I read his autobiography, Hey Shelley, where he was talking about the thing that had propelled him to ministry was not just accepting Christ, but to taking 9 months and spending 8, 9, 10 hours a day doing soaking prayer, doing the meditation praying. Well, clearly he missed a page in that book because he's crashed and burned. He's crashed and burned several times, I understand. Now, because of the fact that he refuses to submit himself to a bunch of guys that are not submitted to anybody else either. And he refused to be repentant about anything he had done, apparently. He was involved in the ministry my family had ties to in the States. One of them was on the committee. They were part of that whole goings down. It was a gong show, and he was resistant behind the scenes. Grace, yes. And like I said, by that time, I had already stepped away and was already looking at these people and everything they did with Askins. And I was already having such problems with people I had gone to church with who now called me a homosexual abortionist because I had joined the contemporary worship service at the Methodist Church. Methodist Church. And they all judged the Methodists as being homosexual abortionists. So it was really eye-opening. And I always said from like till almost 2009, I cried every single day because those people tortured me every single day in my small southern town. So I didn't so much fall away as I leapt away because they just kept piling me with guilt and condemnation. And I started to appreciate the Methodist Church, even though there wasn't a lot of excitement there, because of the fact that there was accountability. That if somebody was going to tell everybody to buy guns in practice for Armageddon, that somebody at the regional, state, national office was going to have something to say and say, oh no, maybe you shouldn't say that. Or if somebody was going to say everybody had to wear head coverings because you were tempting their husband with sinful hair, somebody at the regional, state, national level might have something to say. Somebody else would be having a fit about a song you may have done that was an old Don McLean song at a community event and said that the church is going to hell in a handbasket as a result. All three of those things actually happened at my old church. They actually happened. So there's so much crazy that I'm still writing about and still trying to decompress from. I also think of snake handlers. Yep. Tongue scares the bejesus out of me. Those Southern Baptist snake charmers too. And those heathen Methodists. That's right. So they tortured me for ages. I would see somebody and say, hey, so-and-so, how are you doing? I heard you denied Christ. Aren't you afraid you're going to go to hell? How can you deny Christ after everything we've been through? I can't talk to you anymore. Or picked up the phone and calling somebody was a dear friend that you had gone overseas with a number of times, whose children you'd taken overseas without them, and they'd taken your children places. Call up and say, hey, Bobby, is your mama there? Mama says she didn't want to talk to you ever again. Don't call, click. So it was a lot of that. Layers of decompression. Yes, like peeling an onion. And at first I felt horribly guilty. And then once the guilt passed, that's when I said I was allergic to that kind of church. And I would start getting nauseous when I heard some of the old songs. And if somebody came around me and tried to witness to me, I was kind of like, talk to my hand. I wasn't having any part of it. Now I've reached kind of a detente with a lot of that stuff. I don't participate. I don't encourage it. If I can, I speak to it directly. I would laugh at those people if I were you and they talk to me like that. I laugh now, but at the time I cried. It was incredibly painful. It was a lot of PTSD, a lot of PTSD. And I have a dear friend who's still engaged in it. And I can only take her in teeny tiny small doses as a result. She came here and stayed for 10 days. And while I love her dearly, it got to be a little old because at the end, she started, come to my flavor of Jesus. And I was just like, talk to the hand. I was not having it. The human brain can justify all sorts of, yes, it's scary what rational people can believe. Shelley, and not only what rational people can believe, but rational people can not speak up about, because as I talk about in my book, there are a number of practices I was extremely uncomfortable with that I didn't participate in, but I never spoke up against that I should have, like the exorcism that took place at the teen lock-in event. I should have stopped that. To my everlasting shame, I did not. If I have regrets about anything, it's that and the time the boy got up and talked about going to hell because he masturbated 10 times a day. And everybody was shaming him. And I was just like, because all I could think of is he sounded perfectly normal to me. Yep, I've walked through that in my own journey. Years of therapy and times where I had to go back and heal another layer. Grace, that's what I've had to do. I always tell everybody leaving, therapy, therapy, therapy. You may have to keep going back. I have a wonderful therapist in the States that when I would hit those places after I'd been out of my major bulk of therapy with her, I could pick up the phone and say, hey, Elise, I need to come in for a fine tuning. And my husband at one point had a really wonderful Christian counselor who was trained in secular counseling from UVA that used that combined with Christian belief and prayer. And it was the best thing in the world. She really had it together. It saved me too, because, I couldn't have taken much more of that. I started to fight back, and then I started developing ways to deal with it. Writing for NLQ was actually restorative for me because I was able to look back at a lot of this stuff and just completely take it apart and talk about why it was wrong. Why you shouldn't listen to Michael Pearl talking about telling you to beat your 6-month-old. So blessed for a therapist as well. Christian background, secular training, total understanding, and I wasn't crazy after all. Grace, isn't that the most fulfilling thing when you find somebody who hears you and says, yes, I hear your journey. I understand your journey. You're not nuts. You're not nuts. It is what it is. And my therapist actually helped me develop ways to deal with them. And I talk about this a lot. I was telling my friend today, there's friends, family you have to go non-contact with in the church, because if you don't, you lose your damn mind. They will push you off your healing and slow you down. And you have to sometimes think about them in advance and figure out what you're going to say to them, because there's times when you have to come up with ways to deal with this crap, because just because you do not think this is a good thing. Who is trying to contact me? Just because, where was I? Oh, going non-contact is for your mental health sometimes. And you have to come up with these different ways of dealing with the blind sheep, particularly when they start throwing rocks at you. And they throw rocks at you. They will do that. They will shade you hard. The most effective method I ever found, besides saying, oh, bless your heart, move it along, is the most effective thing I ever did was start doing what Jesus did. Somebody would rush up and say, oh, I heard you're a non-believer now. How could you do that? I said, I told you that. I said, well, Sydney down the street said that. Now, why would she say something like that? Because she's concerned for your eternal salvation. Has she spoken to me lately? And by the time you've done that, you've turned somebody around and around on those questions, they shut up eventually. because they feel shame. They suddenly start feeling shame when you start just turning everything back into a question. And that's something I actually picked up from Stephen's ministry training at the Methodist Church to become a Stephen's minister. Reflexive listening and asking questions. If you're trying to help somebody, the questions can be something you're trying to help them with. But if you have somebody that's just being a pest, you can ask those questions all the live long damn day, run them in circles, and they will eventually wake up and smell the coffee and drift away. You ditch your cell phone. I can't do that. I like my cell phone, but I had to ditch my home phone. Yeah, because they gossip and they realize with the questions. Yep. Socratic method. Answer questions with questions. Exactly. And it works wonders. You can do that anytime you feel uncomfortable. Sheep are stupid animals. It's almost like a mob mentality. Yeah. And when you're in those kind of groups, you are kind of like a sheep, because I was talking about that in my book too. There's things that they do to shut down thinking. One of the most primary things is to involve you in everything they possibly can involve you with. I'm sorry, I forgot to take this. And I would like to be able to sleep tonight without nerve pain. If they can involve you in so many things and just wind you up and get you over involved all the time, you're not thinking, you are doing. You are doing. There's no thought going into it. This is what you've become. And at first it feels good. You're like, wow, I am really being used in the kingdom of God. And they bring you in sometimes by the love bomb, which is what they kept doing to me. They kept love bombing me, and then plugged me in. And I wasn't as smart as Hank Hill. I didn't pick up on it because Hank Hill, there was an episode of King of the Hill called Church Hoppers or Church Hopping. And Hank and his wife left their Methodist church and joined a non-denom, and they were immediately plugged in with way too many activities left and right. Peggy was like she just jumped right in. Hank was more like my husband. He was way quicker, way quicker. It took my husband a little while to say no to all that stuff. And once I joined worship team, I had to say no to a lot of stuff because worship team was a whole lot of work and crazy work and a lot of rehearsals and just things going on behind the scenes that you would not believe in and you would not believe. So I always said, if the church was a big, weird family, worship team was a much tighter, weirder family. So all these things would happen. I talk about in my book, there was a member of worship team that she just did not like me at all. I could have handed her a $100 bill every minute of every day for months, and she wouldn't have liked me. She would have found something to say. She got on to me about my breasts. Yes. Can you believe that? Would say that I was immodestly dressed because I was wearing a potato sack all the time, and you could tell that I had lady lumps. She threw shade at me for having fancy toilet paper one time. She just threw shade left and right. And one time she tried to engineer a worship team overthrow, throwing the leader out, and she made the mistake of approaching me. And I was kind of like, and this is your business. How? I told her, I said, if you've read your Bible, you will know that the way to approach this is to approach the worship team leader with your concerns and talk to them about it. And if he refuses to listen to you, go to the pastor. But you're not supposed to go to us. And eye traps. Yes, there were being eye traps because I'm all shrunken now, but back then, Cadillac bumper bullets. No matter what I wore, I just looked top heavy, regardless. There was nothing I could really do about that. And per her, that was a big problem. Hey, hey there. Are you doing better now? I hope so. I'm sorry I had to ditch. My husband had to go get paint, and we had to get his computer worked on. And we were bumping up against the closing of everything. Eating Taco Bell, always a good time. Always a good time. So eye traps galore. And like I said, this person just did not like me. When you offend somebody, and I think I offended her when I told her she needed to go to the worship team leader and talk to him first rather than go behind his back to all the musicians and say, hey, so-and-so shouldn't be the worship team leader because X, Y, and Z. And it was dumb reasons. It was stuff like he wasn't organized. Well, I knew that worship team leader pretty well, Walt. I knew Walt and his wife, Debbie, extremely well. We had daughters the same age who ran around together, were close friends. I was in their house a lot. They were in mine. I knew that Walt struggled with bipolar and other things, and with substance abuse issues and all sorts of different things. So when Debbie could not make it there, I kind of stepped forward and pulled all the music and did all the organizational things for Walt. I just stepped up because I knew the kind of guy Walt was. Talented musician, but so many just things all over the place. He was just so disorganized. Women are petty about looks to other women. You know, my husband, this is Possum Creek, yes. My husband said it recently, said, do you realize that this woman you're talking about, I call her Velma, but that's not really her real name. It's a close name, but not quite. Said, do you realize that Velma wasn't the best looking woman in the world? She probably was jealous of you, Debbie, and a bunch of other women up there. Is like, I started thinking about that. I said, I thought she looked perfectly fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, she was a little bit older than us, so it may have been aging and some thing like that going on. Could easily have been. All I knew is every Sunday after church, I would get called on the carpet at the pastor's office, and he would say, there have been complaints about the immodesty of how you're dressed today on the platform. And I'm like, I'm wearing a loose navy blue skirt with a loose white button-up blouse with yellow flowers on it and a loose yellow sweater. How can there be any immodesty? I am covered from mid-calf to neck. He'd say, no, I think you look fine. You just need to be aware of how you're coming across to other people sometimes. It would just be like this. Every single week, this would be happening. And was she small chested? Yeah, she was actually. I hadn't thought about that, but yes, she was. And after we left the church, I would run into her and her husband every now and then. And her husband was just as sweet as pie, like always. She never once addressed another word to me anytime she saw me. It was like nose in the air and off she went. And I knew there were some serious issues of jealousy with her and some other people because of how she was living. She didn't have, and they are more bothered than the males in the group. Exactly. She was living, I don't even want to go into it, but it was not what I would call the best living situation. Johnny was a great guy. He did a really good job fixing up their home, fixing up their farm, but it was never enough for her because she wasn't living in a suburban kind of 4-bedroom, 3-bath home. So until that happened, I think nothing was ever going to be good enough for her. So she resented those of us that had achieved middle-class status. It sounds like she had her own baggage that had nothing to do with you personally. Exactly. I used to go to church in ripped blue jeans and heavy metal concert tees, and no one ever said a thing to me. They knew who the boss is. Oh, yeah. Now, see, some churches aren't bothered by that. And we had plenty of younger people that came to church like that all the time. And nothing was ever said, which was really odd because when I first joined the church, everybody wore those friggin' cotton jumpers like Michelle Duggar. I even had a set of those, several sets of them. And it was just crazy at first. The face enhancing big collars, the loose jumpers that look like you're wearing a floral potato sack. That was de rigueur. And they finally went by the wayside about a year after we got there. And I was glad because I got tired of wearing that potato sack. It's women who size up and judge other women based on looks most of the time. That's the scary thing. The prairie fashion, so glad that passed. Shelley, did it really? Because when I was in the States, I saw so many prairie clothing everywhere. I bought a couple of blouses that I really liked because I really like feminine clothing. I like clothing with feminine lines and with lace and tucks and all that, but none of this fundamentalist frumper look. We had to wear those jumpers for PE days and soul winning. Oh gosh, soul winning. Now you're bringing back bad memories. I was never real good at that. I got real good at that when we were doing the supernatural stuff, and I would touch people and be able to touch their elbow and say, "Hey, are you having back pain? Can I pray for that?" I was always a lot better at that kind of soul winning than any showing up with a little brochure and saying, "Have you considered Jesus?" I was never very good at that. Yeah, never good. The Amish style and that super long hair. Yes, super long hair. And when all that passed at our old church, I got my hair chin length and started wearing pretty much what I wore for work when I was working outside the house for a while, like business type attire. Prairie clothing came back a bit in 2020. The whole cottagecore movement, not as dumpy as the Duggar jumpers, though. The Duggar jumpers and those giant collars. Mom didn't drag us to the charismatic lunatic church until well after the IFB. I wish she would have kept us at the IFB. It might have been a better thing. At least they had order of decency, and there were things they were going to do in a certain way. The charismatic church, it was kind of anything goes. It's whatever we decide to make up this week. That was basically what started to happen. And I don't know about you guys, but have you watched HBO's The Righteous Gemstones? The guy who stars in it, who wrote and created it, Danny McBride, as a kid, went to the sister church to Possum Creek back in the 90s. And I recognize at least 2 stories from season 1 that happened at our presbytery. Remember when Michelle Duggar got that makeover? She immediately grew her frizzy perm back out. Yep. I had to buy a tux for a church choir, and they would let me stand on stage looking like Dee Snider from Twisted Sister. Oh, wow, that tux was expensive. My dad was not happy about it. Oh, well. Predictable and consistent has virtues. I'm going to say that rather than bandwagon trendy. And then we had a lot of people that started getting tattoos and going that way at one point. And it was all because of, like you said, the trendy, whatever was trendy and trending, whatever charismatic magazine declared was trendy. So Danny McBride's mother did puppets. Our church sent people to her to learn puppets. So it wasn't until last year I actually made the connection. I was like, oh my God, no wonder. I can tell you which mission trip the whole baptizing people and trying to outdo each other in the number baptized, and then the wave machine got turned on. I can tell you which that actually happened. Happened at an overseas mission trip. I wasn't on it, but I heard about it in great detail. So I've been watching The Righteous Gemstones and just laughing because some of it is straight out of, and some of the stuff I'm laughing at, I am getting kind of a vicarious Schadenfreude, shameful joy laugh. Like when this last season, when the youngest boy started getting caught masturbating all over the place and leaving his underwears, his used jockeys everywhere. The father came down hard on him and shamed him so crazy. And it was so straight out of what I had heard at my old church. The great cloud of witnesses is watching you. Your grandmother is watching you molest yourself. All that shameful, shameful crap. It's hysterically funny, but at the same time, you're kind of cringing because you know all this really happened. A lot of it really happened. And Good Christian Bitches. Oh, that was an excellent show. I loved it. I got a big kick out of that one too, except that ABC would not use the title Good Christian Bitches and they did GCB. If you could watch that show, go for it. That is wealthy Christians in, was it Houston or Dallas? I don't remember, but in Texas. My friend Cindy Kunzman, who lived in Texas in the 90s and experienced GCB in real life, said it was very close to what a lot of these women were like in those days. Not only wear the jumper for gym, my parents had to buy it from the school. It was so ugly. Oh, Danielle, I am so sorry you had to wear that thing. I actually still have one of my jumpers, but it was kind of a rebellious one because I made it with spaghetti strings because I figured I was going to wear a t-shirt over it. Who cared if it had a 3-inch wide strap or a spaghetti string? The movie Saved was so funny too. It was right up. So anytime I see something that is just, you know, somebody has been there, they walked at that walk and they've seen that crazy, to be able to come up with those things and you're going, yeah, I'm sorry you got that tattoo, but it is, a lot of us have. Oh my goodness, the movie Saved and their band, the Christian Gems, and oh, it's just too funny. I'm filled with the love of Christ. So much of that stuff going on. And that was a good movie that my daughter watched when she was deconverting, because there was a lot of deconversion that had to take place between her brother, herself, myself, and my husband, between the four of us. And she, I think, probably held on to some of the beliefs longer than the rest of us, I think. Artie Timberwolf, you have to see them, at least Saved. It's so funny. And Good Christian Bitches is pretty funny. GCB and The Righteous Gemstones is an HBO show, and it is right on the money. Like I said, Danny McBride went to our sister church for a while. And for a while, our church had those same ugly puppets that his mother was like a rock star in their church for having bought these things and writing all these little scripts and doing all these different scripture plays. So look up on YouTube where he's talking about his mother doing the puppets, because that's one of the funniest things I've seen. Somebody set that to a cartoon they drew, and it was really funny. Like I said, I've seen it from all angles, from the big ministries on down. One thing that my church used to do a lot of that creeped me out too, I would never participate. I wouldn't even look at them when they were on the platform. We would have these huge conferences at our church. Our little church in the countryside we had like 300 members at one point. We had a big membership for a building that small. And we would have these giant healing conferences and things. Sometimes we would even partner with a bigger ministry and have these things. And I got to where well, yeah, you would not believe some of the stuff people do. We would have these huge conferences, and I finally started to call them in my mind like Jesus Palooza 2000, because it was just crazy stuff. And things would happen, weird stuff would happen. All the stuff we're talking about with the crowing like a rooster, falling on the floor, fire tunnels, speaking in tongues, all of that weird stuff would happen. And it felt normal. I had a HBO a few years ago, but now I get the other kind of HBO. Well, I have some of the pirate channels in my Fire Stick, and that's how I actually got to see it, because HBO in Costa Rica did not show it. They're showing House of the Dragon, La Casa del Dragons. They're showing that in repeat. But they're not showing the Righteous Gemstones, which I don't understand. They're showing Succession. They're showing some shows that would only be American-centric. And then they have a bunch of Central American, Latin America-centric programming that takes the place of the Righteous Gemstones. I may have to see if I can get HBO Go, since I do have HBO on my cable here, because my Fire Sticks keep crapping out like crazy. I'm not having any luck with them right now, and I'm not having any luck programming my Linux-based TV in the living room. It's just not working. I see that. That would be awesome, because I am just like I'm not able to access Hulu anymore either. As a result, you can't get Hulu here at all. And if I still have Fire Stick, I can see all this stuff. Just set up my VPN, log into my VPN, and go right into those things. But I'm not able to do that. So right now, all I have access to is cable, which is pretty good. We have more channels here that I had in the States. What I've got the channels now that I was paying $140 a month for, I'm paying about, with internet, 60 or so, or $40, somewhere in that range. I got a VPN, yes, I do, and use it to change your IP location US. That's what I have to do. And now I think I'm going to have to do that and sign up for, and sign up again. I don't see any other way around it. Sometimes they let me in with the VPN. Sometimes they stop me. It just really depends. I have a decent VPN too, so I need to figure out what I'm going to do about that, because I do want to see The Handmaid's Tale, even though last season I'm kind of watching like this, because it's rather brutal and hard to watch. And I do that. That's the first thing I do. I set my IP location to California and boogie right on in. I have a friend I may have to try and call and see if I can bum another Fire Stick off of him and just put the Fire Stick on the TV that's doing the Linux thing, because it's been some years since I fooled it all with Linux, and it's just not intuitive. Just flip it to Germany on your browser. Sometimes with the VPN, I will change it to different countries, because here's another VPN trick. If you're trying to watch, sometimes there's some movies you can get that are awesome in Italy or through Spain or Great Britain, and you have to change your VPN location to one of those locations to be able to get these things. So I've done that, particularly if I want to look at German television in German, I'll do that. So that's all that's going on with that. But there's a new movie that came out. A couple of people I know went and saw it. I can't remember the name of it, but it is about a mega church that went belly up because of scandals and things. And everybody's rating it as bad. And I know it'll never make it to the movie theater here. So I have to find a way to take a look at that as well as the new Weird Al movie coming out. Because that looks like a real hoot. And I'm pretty sure the Weird Al will be frowned upon in my old church. I used to love Weird Al, and then we joined our church. I kind of forgot Weird Al existed, which is kind of weird because Weird Al is a Christian. It was only after I left my old church that I managed to immerse myself in the genius that is Al again, without feeling guilty about it, that is. So there is that. All I can say is if Weird Al had had the ripped body that the young man playing him in the film has, you'd have had to beat me away from the stage with a hose when I was 20. I would have chased him hard. Weird Al is still around. Artie Timberwolf, he has got a movie coming out. It's Funny or Die did a thing, I think 8 or 9 years ago, where it was like the real unauthorized story of Weird Al, where they had Aaron Paul dressed up like Weird Al making out with some girl that was supposed to be Madonna. This is that story. And it's like all the things that didn't happen, like him making out with Madonna, the sex, the drugs, the rock and roll, the things that never happened. And Weird Al is in it. And I've seen the trailers and just hooted because it looks like it's going to be funny. It's going to be a send up, but it will be funny. So there's that. So I hope you've been amused by my crazy stories of trying to speak in tongues. Shandai, everybody was doing that. They were doing it like crazy at their old conferences. And so I'm going to talk about a lot of that, all of this stuff in my book in more detail too, particularly the conferences, because we were having our Jesus 2000 Boogaloos all the time. And things got very weird sometimes with those things, almost like it was a parody. I remember he did the Just Eat It. Yep, he did quite a few of those sort of things. And I'm sad to say, I'm so old that some of these songs that he's parodied in recent years, I'm more familiar with this parody than I am with the original song. Even though I got to say, there's one thing I miss about having teenagers in the household. I miss not being exposed to new music. Now it's like, last year when I was at my daughter's, she forced me to watch all of the assorted videos and listen to the music of Little Nas X. And I got kind of Little Nas on the brain for a while and was listening to his songs. And I was watching the Fundamentalists for Klemp and throw a fit about his video where he's dressed up riding a stripper pole straight to hell. Just laughing over that because it outraged them so badly. It's like, look, it's just a music video. I hardly think anybody is going to dress like a male stripper and ride a stripper pole to hell. So I'm leaving you with that image tonight. And yeah, so thankfully I'm feeling better. I hope to be back to doing videos here very shortly, except tonight I had to come on here and rant about this because Prairie so kindly reminded me of speaking in tongues. I'd forgotten all about that. Y'all have a wonderful evening and get lots of good rest. That's what I'm hoping for tonight.